Hi researchers, this is Dr. Balhan. In this video, I'd like to walk us through the qualitative methods slideshow that I already have posted to give you some insight into this, well, in my opinion, really useful method, as well as to guide you through your qualitative coding practice assignment that's due this week. So to jump right in, we need to think about when a qualitative study is most useful. Okay? From your reading, you have probably discovered that qualitative and descriptive and observational methods are particularly helpful when we're in a new area of research. So if there isn't a lot of previous literature and research out there, there's plenty for us to gain by just inquiring and gathering this kind of open-ended information about a topic. The goal of a qualitative study is to describe behavior or phenomenon or to deeply understand it. So if your question tends to be about, what was the experience of this population of people, that's signaling that perhaps you're looking for a qualitative type study. Additionally, you might choose a qualitative study because of your own values. This is bringing us back to the lecture we had about the Western assumptions of science and knowledge generation and indigenous assumptions. So perhaps you have egalitarian values or constructivist cosmology. So that might lead you to qualitative methods. Now, the way the method looks is we typically are seeking participants who are information rich. So this means basically we're looking for experts, people who have intimacy with the topic that we're studying. Okay, so I wouldn't just sample my class of students because they're convenient for me. I actually have to go looking for the participants who are information rich. Typically, our sample size is going to be small. Okay, so sometimes people read a qualitative study and they see that they interviewed, let's say, 12 people. I'm using this as an example from my own research, my dissertation, where I interviewed widowed women, and they become alarmed that that small sample size really can't tell us anything. But as we work through this, you'll see that that small information-rich sample can actually really help us to, again, understand a phenomenon. The procedures for a qualitative study tend to be open-ended. So we might be asking open-ended questions in an interview, or like you all completed, you might ask open-ended questions but receive the answers through a written medium. The interview can be structured where you have a set amount of questions and you never veer from it, or semi-structured. So in this, there is an interview protocol with planned for questions, but you can veer from that by asking probes and for additional information from your participants. So in the qualitative work that you did last week, it was just a structured question. There were no additional probes that any of you answered. Typically, you will audio or video record, or in our written version, you get the exact written transcripts. And from there, you do want to create a written record that is exactly the transcript of the response. So this means you're transcribing all those ums, like what I just did. You're transcribing any nonverbals that you notice in the interview process. Okay. I will show you a transcript as I move into talking about analysis. Okay, so once you've gone through selecting your participants and interviewing them, and you've made your transcripts, which back in my day, used to be quite a laborious process of pausing, rewinding, playing, and typing up exactly what your participants said. It'll go much quicker for you all if you ever embark on a qualitative study these days. So you've got this transcript, and now we're going to code the transcript for themes that increase in abstraction. So the very first level is called open coding. In open coding, you generate a large number of codes that are directly tied to this transcript. So they might even use the exact same language that your participant used, and you're really not trying to interpret or say what this code might mean. So if I can Get this right, I'll show you the transcript from a participant from my dissertation who gave me permission to use her interview with my students. And what you can see here is my question, that's here, I'm the researcher. And then here we have her first response. And you notice that we've got her interjections here. I probe to get her to tell me a little bit more, and she continues. So you all have transcripts right now, and they are just begging you to code them. And what we would do for the open coding is you would comb through each response and notice, think of it like hot words or keywords or information-rich phrases. So in this first one, Alzheimer's, to me, stands out. So what you might do if you're using the computer, you might be doing highlights and then make a comment where you identify what the code is. So I would highlight this. I'm going to keep it as Alzheimer's, just keep it tied exactly to what she told me. And then I see this, nursing home. Okay, that seems, like it's a relevant piece of her experience becoming a widow. So I would highlight that. I would make the code that I think I'm going to keep it nursing home. Okay. Let's see, we've got heart failure, so that would probably be another one about death. But I think I'm going to call it heart failure. Maybe you might decide to say, but it's died of heart failure, so you'd put that in. But notice I'm not going beyond what my participant has told me in these open codes. If I'm continuing on, we get here, notice that she talks about Alzheimer's several other times. Sometimes students think, well, we already have the information about Alzheimer's, so we can just skip that. But when you're open coding, it's okay to be generating a lot of codes. It's okay if they're repetitive, because that is giving you information. That is really telling you about this participant's experience becoming a widow. Alzheimer's, just even in her first basically 2 sentences that she told me, has popped up 3 times. Clearly that is something that's on her mind, right? So you don't want to lose that quantity of the detail by just ignoring it because you already have an open code for it. So that's how it's going to look. You're going to keep working through all the responses that you have, coding in this open setting for hot words, hot phrases, information-rich phrases that are very closely tied to what your participant is saying. Okay? And then I'm not going to go to the present screen right here because we're going to flip back to another coding page. But once you notice you've worked through your transcripts and done your open codes, now we move into the next level, which is called axial coding. This goes up one level in abstraction, so you as the researcher might be labeling codes a little bit more interpretively than you were with open coding. Okay, so if somebody's talking a lot about sadness, depression, feeling anxious, right? So all those things in the open code you probably called sadness, depression, anxiety. Now in the axial coding, you'd say, you know what, those codes actually group together. They're conceptually related, and the concept they relate to is maybe it's emotions or maybe it's mental illness. So that's your job as the researcher, is to decide what's this category that the codes fit. So let me show you the axial codes I have for this same participant. I have it broken up by the questions, the structured questions that I asked. So for this first one here, question 1 about becoming a widow, I took all of the open codes and I looked for the categories that they seemed to hang together. So I had plenty about Alzheimer's. That seemed to be its own axial code, where she talked about the disease, it progressing and getting worse, talked about people living with Alzheimer's, a chronic illness. Okay, she also throughout her talk talked about or gave examples of the physical deterioration of her husband. She didn't necessarily say that. She talked about him being totally dependent on others, talked about him not being able to be alone. she said incontinence, she said wouldn't eat. All those things to me as the researcher described this concept of physical deterioration. So I can take all those open codes and clump them together under the axial code of physical deterioration. So this is the second part of your qualitative coding practice. Once you have all your open codes, you're going to see what kinds of axial themes come together. There are fewer axial codes than open codes, typically. And as you see, like I've done here, I might recommend for you too that you have 3 questions that your participants, you all, answered. You might keep your codes and your axial codes together by question. So here's my question 2, and that might be how you organize your coding as well. Okay, flipping back here to our presentation, we talked about the axial codes. This is where your coding practice ends. The next step in qualitative methods, though, is to bring these axial codes up into broad themes that cut across all the different transcripts. So they cut across your various participants. So this is where you're looking for really abstract ideas that seem to capture the essence or the true root of the experience you're studying. So these tend to be quite broad, again, up in abstraction, up in a level of interpretation. This is kind of the main conclusion, right? So this is what it means to be a widow. That's one of the things I was trying to answer in my study. So I was looking for broad themes about life being brand new, a whole new world and a whole new life. Broad themes of friendships and relationships. That's one that was quite large and cut across many transcripts. Okay, again, for your assignment, you're not doing thematic coding. Now, unlike quantitative studies where we sample lots and lots of people to make sure that we get enough data, what we do in a qualitative study is we see when participants aren't telling us anything new. That signals to us that we don't need to collect more data. So if in my study I interviewed 13 women and I was coding their transcripts, if it seemed like I was getting new information with each new transcript, I would need to interview more and more women. However, I found that they started telling me pretty much the same things about their widowhood experience, suggesting that my data were saturated and I didn't need to continue to collect information. And then one other piece that's specific to qualitative research is an idea called trustworthiness. And this is almost an equivalent to validity and reliability when we're thinking on the quantitative side. Trustworthiness, though, is not about the ability of our qualitative study to speak generally for the entire population. It's really about how rigorous and how true and faithful the themes are to the transcripts. So some of the ways we establish this idea of trustworthiness is we use a researcher's journal. This is where we might include our own reactions, maybe biases, preliminary ideas on themes, ways that what we're hearing fit theories that we're aware of. We also use transcript audits, and this can be in 2 ways. One is with an expert qualitative researcher, so somebody who's not affiliated with your study, but really knows the method. You'll have them come in and do an audit on your process. The other transcript audit is to send the transcript and codes back to your participants and have them tell you if, in fact, you got everything correct. Did you capture everything that they wanted to say? Do they want to remove anything or add? And is the way that you're interpreting what they said as you're working through those codes, does that ring true for them? So once you've done that as a qualitative researcher, that really signals to the scientific community that you've done your checks and you have data and analyses that we can rely on to tell us something very specific about that population, that sample that you studied. So thanks for listening to this slightly longer lecture. I hope it sheds a little more light on the qualitative coding